Good evening, everybody. My name is Tim. I'd like to welcome all of you to the College of Complexes tonight. We have a good speaker tonight, and when Brown's done collecting money, he will be taking over as moderator. My name's Tim. I'm just going to tell all of you right up front that this is being recorded for posterity's sake for distribution to the internet. You can find past videos of the College of Complexes by clicking on the College of Complexes homepage at www.collegeofcomplexes.org, or you may also go to my own website, timsvideo.com, click on a link to the College of Complexes, and you'll find about the last 3 years archived up there ready to go. Our format consists of the three following things. We have the speaker, we have a brief announcements period, we have a speaker who speaks first, then we have an infamous and long question and answer period, followed by our infamous rebuttal period. We have two rules here at the college. One, no personal attacks, and two, one fool at a time. So now me being and making myself looking out like a fool.
Okay, Kyle, you're up.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kyle.
All right, well, first of all, I want to say, I'm trying to adjust this just a little bit.
You're okay.
I want to say thank you for having me as a speaker. As mentioned, I've had the opportunity and privilege to speak in this forum before, and I've also had the opportunity to attend. And both times I've been involved, it was very invigorating, interesting discussion. So I hope that today's talk incites the same discussion as well. All right, so Lauren Eiseley, the American philosopher and author, wrote that man is the cosmic orphan. Animals have instincts to guide them, but man alone seems to ask the greater questions of life. Who am I? What is my purpose? Where am I going? That's right. And humans have often answered these profound questions with reference to a belief in God, some sort of creator or higher power who purposed to create humanity, and in whom we can find our purpose and meaning to life. But ever since the Enlightenment, where mankind supposedly threw off the shackles of religion, these questions have often been tried to be answered without belief in God. And indeed, there's a new movement called the New Atheism, which is supposedly afoot. And this is where authors like Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and the late Christopher Hitchens have made very fierce and ferocious arguments that belief in God is irrational and possibly even immoral in this modern age and should be rejected by rational thinkers. In fact, Richard Dawkins, perhaps the preeminent of the new atheists, has this to say. He's also the author of a book called The God Delusion. He says, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. I think that we can see in this quotation not only a strong denial of any evidence for the existence of God, but also a bit of a hint at how important this question may be. Because answering those cosmic questions about purpose seem to be perhaps a little bleak if God doesn't exist. As Dawkins argues on that hypothesis, there is at bottom no design or purpose, no evil or good, pitiless indifference. And that seems like it might not be the most optimistic of outlooks. The Apostle Paul had a very different perspective. He wrote almost 2,000 years ago in his letter to the Romans, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. So, whereas the new atheists argue that the universe exhibits the characteristics we'd expect if there was no God whatsoever, the Apostle Paul, long ago, made the exact opposite argument. So, who's right? Is the Apostle Paul just outdated, maybe a product of his time before the advance of scientific evidence and rational modern thinking? Or is it true that we can discern that God exists on the basis of the things that have been made?
Yes.
Well, in this brief talk, I actually want to argue that the Apostle Paul was right about this. And in fact, I believe that recent scientific discoveries and critical thinking can actually support this evidence of God's existence that we can find in nature. And so I'd like to look at a couple of those arguments here tonight. the first fundamental question that we would want to answer is, why does the universe exist at all? The philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz said, the first question which we have a right to ask will be, why is there something rather than nothing? This is the quintessential question of philosophy. Why does anything at all exist? Now, theists have long argued, theists, believers in God, have long argued that the existence of the universe at all is evidence for a creator. The creation implies a creator. But the common response to this, especially in modern times, has been the thought that perhaps the universe has just always existed eternally, as a brute fact. So if the universe has always existed, perhaps there really isn't a need for a designer, a creator of the universe. Perhaps it's just as a brute fact, the universe has always existed, and that's just the way it is. And but theists, or believers in God, in the Western tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition, have from the beginning argued that the universe actually began to exist. It was created by God a finite time ago. But this was, until recent times, regarded as something that would just have to be taken on faith, that there wasn't any necessarily evidence for this belief. But actually, there's been some recent scientific discoveries that have lent remarkable support to the theist belief that the universe began to exist a finite time ago. And we'll look at some of that evidence here shortly. But I think that if the universe did begin to exist, then we have what could be the foundation for a powerful argument for God's existence. We could argue as follows, with the following three premises. 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. And 3, which follows deductively from the logic here, therefore the universe has a cause. And when we analyze what it means to be a cause of the entire space-time universe, then I think we'll see that there are some strong implications for the existence of God. All right, so let's evaluate these premises in turn to see if this argument holds any sway. The first premise, everything that begins to exist has a cause. What could we possibly say to argue in favor of this premise? I think the first thing we'd want to say is that this is sort of a foundational principle of metaphysics, kind of a first principle. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Another way of saying this is, out of nothing, nothing comes. Nothing has no productive capacity, it has no potentiality, it doesn't seem to be any way that nothing could produce anything. This seems to me to be an intuitive foundational principle. And thus, I think we would have to have pretty strong counter-evidence to reject a claim that seems as intuitively obvious as this. But if you're not necessarily impressed with intuition, I think that we can also marshal in favor of this premise empirical support. In fact, it's hard to think of any premise you could offer that would have more empirical support.
The usual?
Because whenever we look for, whenever we see an event, we always can find an underlying cause. If you hear a noise out in the hallway and you ask somebody, what caused that? And they reply to you, nothing, it just happened. You would obviously dismiss that. We know that there is some sort of cause, even if we can't determine what it is. In fact, it seems like modern science is based upon this principle, because if there wasn't causes for events, then what would science even be trying to do? Science tries to determine the cause of events through empirical support. So it's hard to imagine any premise that could be more strongly supported by empirical evidence than this premise, everything that begins to exist has a cause. So now I think we should look at the second premise, which is probably more controversial. The universe began to exist. So before I mentioned that the common atheist response to the theistic belief that a creation implies a creator was that the universe has just always existed, and therefore it doesn't really require any sort of further explanation. It could be viewed as simply a brute fact. But as I've mentioned, there's actually been some extremely strong evidence coming from science and physics recently that shows that the universe actually did begin to exist. I'd like to look at 3 different lines of evidence for this contention. The first is Big Bang cosmology. Big Bang cosmology is the prevailing view of how the universe began to exist, or the prevailing cosmological model in the sciences today. This is a kind of a rough depiction of the Big Bang model. It starts at what's called a singularity. This would be the beginning of the universe here, about 13.8 billion years ago. Probably a little longer than 6,000 years. But it starts right here at this point and expands at a massive rate of inflation at the very beginning time, right after the creation of the universe. and then it expands continuously, and this is where we're at over here. The universe has continued to expand, and it will continue to do so indefinitely unless something else causes that to change. This is the prevailing model of cosmology, and it has a remarkable amount of empirical support that we've discovered in the past several decades. All right, so what is the evidence for Big Bang cosmology? Well, in 1929, Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe is expanding. This is based on galactic redshift. Essentially, he noticed that when he looked at galaxies, the light was shifted to the red end of the spectrum, which shows that the light waves were actually stretching. So when a light source moves away, it lengthens the waveform, and therefore there's a red spectrum. Whereas if light comes towards you, then it compresses the waveform and produces a bluer tint. Edwin Hubble noticed that in any galaxies he looked at, there was a consistent redshift, and it was equal in all directions, therefore showing pretty conclusively that the universe is expanding. So if you think of this evidence that the universe is expanding, what you can do now is rewind the tape. So we know the universe is expanding by physical principles. Then if we can rewind the tape and get back and back and back and back and further back until we get to what's called the singularity, or the beginning of the universe. And this was the first major piece of evidence that the universe began to exist, and the first major piece of evidence for Big Bang cosmology. Well, this is a radical view, and of course, if this is really the way the universe was created or began to exist, it's going to have some pretty big physical consequences. One of those consequences is microwave background radiation. So in 1946, George Gamow predicted that there would be microwave background radiation from the extremely hot early stage of the universe. So when the universe was compressed in an extremely small space, there was a lot of matter in a very small space, which means it was extremely hot. So basically what he was predicting is that at this early stage right here, there would be an extremely hot environment. And if you looked back in time, you could see the afterglow of this in what's called microwave background radiation. Once again, this was discovered. So this was predicted in 1946, discovered in 1965, and this is a image map of the cosmic microwave background radiation showing a fairly even distribution of this slight warmth that you can still see in the entire universe. And this was a dramatic confirmation of the prediction and great evidence in favor of the Big Bang cosmology.
It's like an Easter egg.
It is like an Easter egg. It's nice. And in fact, evidence for the Big Bang cosmology continues to come out. So in fact, in March, there was some discoveries that actually looks like it might be a smoking gun for the Big Bang, as they put it. So researchers at Harvard University reported that they believe they have found a signal in the sky that emerged during the first moments of the ultra-rapid expansion, that period of inflation we looked at, just after the universe came into existence in the Big Bang. The scientists think that they have observed gravitational waves, which were first postulated in 1916 by Albert Einstein as part of the general theory of relativity. So gravitation waves are essentially ripples in space-time that have been described as the first tremors of the Big Bang. So once again, this actually just came out in March. So we see that evidence continues to pile on that the Big Bang cosmology is probably an accurate description of how the universe came into existence. It's ironic because the name Big Bang cosmology was actually originally coined as a derisive term by Fred Hoyle, who didn't like the model because it kind of had some theistic implications. But despite the fact that he had a distaste for it, the fact of the matter is that scientific evidence has continued to support this cosmology. All right, so let's look at a second line of evidence, independent of this, that the universe began to exist. This is found in the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics says that in all energy exchanges, if no energy enters or leaves the system, so it's a closed system, the potential energy of the state will always be less than that of the initial state. So that's a complicated way of saying basically that heat will disperse, or energy will disperse. An example would be if you start a fire in the middle of this room. I'm not advocating we do that. I shouldn't have said that. It's not a fire threat. But if we started a fire and then put it out, then that heat would eventually disperse evenly throughout the room. And that is based on the principle of second law of thermodynamics. We have a similar thing happening with the universe because, as you may know, for example, the sun is running out of energy and eventually will expire, unfortunately. So hopefully we've moved on to a new home by then in several billion years. But the entire universe is expanding, and this energy that, at the very beginning moment, there was a ton of energy, and that energy has been dispersing through time, throughout the entire universe. This means that if you follow the timeline to the far, far future, trillions and trillions of years in the future, we're going to have what's called the heat death of the universe, unless, of course, God intervenes, in which this would basically be when all the usable energy in the universe is all used up. So there's no stars, there's no heat, nothing but a dilute soup of individual particles floating around through expanding space, at which time there would, of course, be no possibility of life. So basically, the intuition is this. If that is where we are headed, then it implies that we have not been heading there for an eternity. If we have already existed, if the universe had already existed to eternity past, we would already be in a state of heat death. The fact that we still have usable energy in the universe because of the second law of thermodynamics actually shows the universe began to exist. And finally, the third piece of evidence for the beginning of the universe came in 2003 when Bohr, Guth, and Vilenkin, three leading physicists, none of whom believe in God, came up with this theorem, which proved that any universe, any realistic model of the universe, which is on average expanding over time, is going to require a beginning. So even if you try to have fancy different types of cosmologies beyond the Big Bang, or do multiple universes, no matter what you do basically, as long as you have an expansion over time, you're just going to have a beginning of the universe. And he said this: "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." I kind of like the language that he uses in this, because he says there is no escape. They have to face the problem. Many scientists are trying to come up with alternative models that will avert the beginning of the universe, because it does have these kind of strong theistic implications. And so for scientists that don't want to accept that God exists, the Big Bang model that we've been discussing is a little bit disconcerting. So, if we accept the arguments stated so far, then we arrive deductively at the third premise: therefore, the universe has a cause. And by universe, I want to be clear, we're talking about the entirety of space-time, everything that we know that exists. Even if there are other universes, I'm talking about the absolute totality of existence we know came into existence at a particular finite time ago. So what would it require to be a cause of the entirety of the universe, everything that exists? Well, the nature of the cause, first of all, the cause would have to be immaterial, because there is no matter without the universe. All matter came into existence at the origin of the universe. The cause would have to be timeless, because there is no time without the universe. We're talking about the creation of space-time. So the cause would actually also have to be timeless. And then third, I would argue that the cause would also have to be a personal agent. And this is probably the key argument here, because if we have a personal cause of the universe, then now we have a pretty strong implication for the existence of God. So let's look at two arguments why I believe the cause of the universe on this model would have to be a personal cause or a God. Let's imagine that if the easy button is pressed down, then the universe will exist. It will be brought into existence. Well, there's three ways that this could happen. One is that the button could be pushed from eternity, so it was always pushed down from eternity past. But if that was the case, the universe would always exist. Therefore, that theory is disproven by the evidence we just looked at. The second way would be perhaps the button can be pushed by a physical cause, something like a Rube Goldberg machine that, through some complicated contraption, eventually presses the button. But the problem here is that there is no physical matter of any kind before the origin of the universe that we've been discussing. But the third option is that the button could be pushed by a personal agent who chooses to create the universe, chooses to press the easy button. So that's the first reason that we should accept that the cause of the universe is a personal cause. A second argument is that we've already discussed that this cause would have to be an immaterial entity because matter does not exist before the creation of the universe. Well, there are really only two things that we can think of that might be immaterial: abstract objects and minds. If another alternative can be proposed, then we'd be willing to consider such an option. But the only thing that can be thought of at this point is abstract objects or minds. So the problem with abstract objects is that they are causally effete. They don't cause anything. An abstract object would be something like the number 7, or if you're a Platonist, maybe you could say the value of justice is an immaterial abstract object, perhaps. But these things don't cause anything. In fact, part of the definition of an abstract object is it's causally impotent. But a mind, at least, is possibly a cause. We all have experience as minds ourselves of causing things. And so therefore, it would possibly make sense that an immaterial mind could be what created the universe. It seems to be the only alternative that we're left with once we consider the fact that the universe began to exist. Dr. Robert Jastrow summarized pretty effectively this argument when he said this. And once again, this is an agnostic physicist who didn't believe in God, but he had these strong words. Astronomers now find that they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. So we can see that the evidence for the origin of the universe, I believe, is very good evidence that God, in fact, does exist. All right. Let's consider a second fundamental fact about the universe, which is the fact that intelligent life exists. At least presumably. I'd like to think that we're intelligent life. So the design argument has traditionally been considered good evidence for God's existence for quite some time. But many people think that the design argument has been disproven because of Darwin's theory of evolution. Richard Dawkins, again, he says, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Basically, Dawkins is arguing that the theory of evolution gets rid of the need to have any sort of cause for complex, intelligent life in the universe. But at the same time that the theory of evolution started to advance, at that same time, science and physics actually started to discover that, in fact, the universe, the fundamental constants and conditions of the universe are actually finely tuned to allow for even the possibility of life, for the possibility even of evolution in the first place. If we discovered on a distant planet some sort of like dome biosphere, and we looked in this dome and we saw a number of dials that were set to particular values for the amount of oxygen, the amount of water in the biosphere, and so forth. It'd be like we looked out there and we saw that all of the values were set just perfectly to allow life to exist on that planet. We would obviously conclude that there is intelligent cause of that biosphere. Basically, our entire universe is such a biosphere. All the dials are set just right so that we have even the possibility for evolution on the planet, much less for intelligent life. So this is really a remarkable discovery, and it's being hotly debated in the scientific and philosophical literature. But I would like to go through three examples of this called fine-tuning, which shows how closely our universe would have to match the actual values it has in order for life to be supported. All right, so the first example is the cosmological constant. The cosmological constant controls the expansion rate of the universe. So back to our model here, the universe expands at a particular rate. As you can see, we've got the very fast inflation at the beginning and then a little bit slower of an expansion. But the cosmological constant is what controls how fast the universe expands. So here's the problem. If the cosmological constant was too large, the universe would fly apart so fast that there couldn't even be any sort of bodies formed. There could be no stars or planets or any sort of gravity could never take hold to actually create solid bodies. There would be nothing but a universe of discrete particles, which obviously would imply there's no life. If the cosmological constant was 0 or negative, then the universe would collapse back into itself. It would never get outside of the singularity, in which case obviously life would also be impossible. And so it's been calculated that this value would need to be what it is to a tune of 1 in 10 to the 53, which is a 10 with 53 zeros after it. That basically means that if we were to randomly select a value for the cosmological constant out of all the possibilities, then only one time out of 10 to the 53 would that value support the possibility of life in this universe. It's hard to imagine how big 10 to the 53 power is. It's a massive number, extremely improbable. The second example of fine-tuning is in gravity, which is perhaps the most familiar of our fundamental forces. The problem with gravity is that if it was too strong, then land-based animals larger than insects would be crushed. And therefore, we wouldn't be able to really have the existence of embodied agents of our intellectual capabilities. So we wouldn't really have intelligent life. But if gravity was 0 or negative, then no stars or solid bodies could form, right? Because gravity is what holds together the stars, holds together the planets, and so forth. Without gravity, everything would fly apart. This factor needs to be tuned to 1 in 10 to the 36th power, so another large number. And once again, of course, if we combine these improbabilities, you have to multiply the improbabilities to the point so you can see how ridiculously unlikely it would become that we actually have a life-permitting universe. All right, and we'll look at one last example, which is actually kind of a combination of examples. If you take multiple parameters, then you can show that it's extremely unlikely for certain things to happen, for example, for the existence of stars to occur in the universe. So Dr. Lee Smolin, he's an atheist physicist, he says this: if the neutron were heavier by 1%, the proton light by the same amount, the electron twice as massive, its electric charge 20% stronger, the neutrino as massive as the electron, etc., there would be no stable nuclei at all. There would be no stars, no chemistry. The universe would just be hydrogen gas, not very amenable to life. To illustrate how truly ridiculous this number is, we might note that the part of the universe we can see from Earth contains about 10 to the 22 stars, which together contain about 10 to the 80 protons and neutrons. That's the number of protons and neutrons that we can see in the observable universe. These numbers are gigantic, but they are infinitesimal compared to 10 to the 229. In my opinion, a probability this tiny is not something we can let go unexplained. Luck will certainly not do here. We need some rational explanation of how something this unlikely turned out to be the case. And so Dr. Smolin represents the majority view in the scientific community, which is that these fine-tuned parameters do require some sort of explanation. All right, so given the fine-tuning examples we've discussed, let's see if we can put together a good deductive argument for a designer. We could argue the following way. Premise one, the fine-tuning of the universe is due to chance, physical necessity, or design. Two, the fine-tuning is not due to chance or physical necessity. And three, therefore, the fine-tuning of the universe is due to design. Now, the first premise is uncontroversial as long as we accept the fine-tuning parameters that we've just looked at. So now let's look at the controversial second premise. This is where all the action is at today in the scientific and philosophical community. Well, could the fine-tuning be due to physical necessity? Remember that we just talked about how, if the gravity changed a little bit, then it would impact whether or not the Earth would inhabit life, could inhabit life and so forth. But this all depends on the idea that we can actually alter those values. What if those values are set to be exactly what they are because of some sort of fundamental theory, some sort of grand unified theory? That would be the argument here. But there's a couple problems with this approach. First, there's not really any evidence yet for a grand unified theory, and even if there was, we don't know that such a theory would account for all of the fine-tuned parameters. The second problem is that the physicist Paul Davies points out that even a grand unified theory, even if it was true, doesn't account for the initial conditions of the universe. So in addition to the constants that we've talked about, like the constant of gravity, how strong the gravitational force is, there's also initial conditions at the beginning of the universe, when the universe was brought into existence. And these are not explained by any grand unified theory. There's no such thing as a law of initial conditions. So these would also still need to be explained, even if a grand unified theory could be successful. And then the third problem is that grand unified theories don't really necessarily eliminate fine-tuning. They often just bump them up another step. Lee Smolin again points this out. He says that despite all the progress in gauge theories, quantum gravity, string theory, etc., not one of these problems has been solved. Not one mass or coupling constant of any particle considered now to be elementary has ever been explained by fundamental theory. So we see that the chance that physical necessity could be the reason for the universe being fine-tuned is pretty dim. And that's really where we bring the argument to whether the fine-tuning could be due to chance. This is where most people who deny the design inference will go. And if we think about this, there's actually three ways that we could somehow say that the universe exists as it does due to chance. Let's imagine that we have a case study here, or a thought experiment, where you're throwing a dart blindly at a dartboard. If you hit the bullseye, then the life as we know it in this planet will continue. If you miss, then all life will cease to exist in a cataclysmic nuclear event. So a very high-risk game of darts, especially because you're not even able to look at the dartboard. All right, so how could it possibly be the case that you'd hit the bullseye? Well, the first is maybe you just get absolutely lucky. You just take one shot and you hit the bullseye. That's a possibility. The second possibility is, well, you could increase the size of the bullseye. So if the bullseye is extremely small, then we're not going to be too confident that life's going to continue. But if the bullseye was very large, then maybe it's not so unlikely that it could be hit by chance. The third option is you could throw a lot of darts. So, if you only had one shot at it, things probably wouldn't look too good. But let's say you had 1,000 darts, or you had 1 billion darts. Although your arm would probably get pretty tired eventually. You could keep trying until you hit one, and then possibly you would hit the bullseye just by sheer chance. All right. So let's look at these three different options. This exhausts the possible ways in which we could have a universe by chance given the fine-tuning parameters we talked about. Hitting the bullseye by blind luck. It seems irrational to suppose that this is a good option given improbabilities that we talked about being so large. But you could try to blunt the force of this by arguing in the following way. You could say, well, yeah, but if the universe were not life permitting, then we wouldn't even be here to notice. So obviously the universe permits life. We're here. If it did not, we wouldn't be here to complain about it. And can be enticing reasoning, but the philosopher and physicist John Leslie, in his book Universes, created an extremely powerful analogy that shows the fault in this reasoning. So imagine that you were brought in front of a firing squad of 50 marksmen. You're convicted of treason, and you're blindfolded. You hear the countdown, 3, 2, 1, bang. All 50 marksmen fire the gun. You notice you're still alive. Every single marksman missed you. Should you be surprised that you are still alive? Yeah, definitely. This is extremely surprising that I'm still alive. You feel like you're the luckiest person in the world. In fact, you probably start to think, was this some sort of elaborate prank that my friends are playing on me and I haven't really been convicted of treason? Or something. Some sort of design explanation would have to be in order. How is it possible that 50 marksmen would all miss? Of course, we could increase the number of marksmen in the analogy to the point where it becomes obvious that some sort of design is at play. The point, though, is that we would still be surprised that we're still alive if somehow, after all these marksmen shot at us, we're still there. So the reasoning is this. We should not be surprised that we don't observe that we are dead, but we should be surprised to observe that we are alive. So the reality is that when you're facing the marksman, it's just very unlikely that you're still going to be alive, and you should be surprised at that fact. And most philosophers accept this line of reasoning, so therefore this idea of appealing to blind chance has fallen out of favor. Let's look at the two other possibilities for chance. First would be increasing the size of the bullseye. There's two ways we could do this. One is we could refute all of the examples of fine-tuning, including the 3 examples I provided tonight, and then the many others that are out there in the literature. The problem is that this is extremely unlikely because a lot of the fine-tuning parameters are very, very solid. The other problem is that there's actually about 50 of these that are discussed in the literature. It's extremely unlikely that all of them are wrong. And just like in a court case, if there was 50 pieces of independent evidence, perhaps you could find little nitpicks here and there with each piece of evidence, but the cumulative case would still give you strong reason to believe in the conviction. So it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to get around the fine-tuning by refuting all of the individual examples. The second way we could increase the bullseye is we could say, listen, the reality is that you're just talking about if your type of life exists. Maybe there's other types of life.
Yeah.
Maybe we're not considering the different possibilities for life that could exist under different initial conditions or different fundamental constants. That would be true if, depending on which fine-tuning parameters we're talking about. The examples that I've mentioned, I focused on examples that show that life is just not even conceivable in these alternative universes. We're not talking about life is just a little bit harder, things are a little bit rougher, we break more bones or things like that. We're talking about things like the universe is nothing but a dilute mass of hydrogen atoms. For example, if the cosmological constant was too large, there'd be nothing but hydrogen spread throughout the universe in that dilute soup. Or if the cosmological constant was negative, then we would be collapsed into a singularity. Life is not even conceptually possible if there's nothing but hydrogen atoms. And so these kinds of examples, if they really preclude life at all, then then these examples show that the bullseye is actually extremely small for any sort of life to exist. We're not trying to argue that human life has to exist. We're just trying to argue that the universe is fine-tuned for some sort of intelligent life whatsoever. Like I say, most of the fine-tuning parameters that we've discussed and that are in the literature show alternative universes that are just impossible to imagine life existing in those universes. And now we come to the most common alternative explanation to design that currently is out there in the philosophical and scientific community. We could throw lots of darts. And the parallel to throwing lots of darts in our dartboard analogy is the multiverse hypothesis. So this is the view that there are many, many other universes apart and maybe independent of our own. Maybe there's trillions, maybe there's an infinite number. And this is probably the leading alternative to design in the scientific community today. Well, there are some problems with this view that there's multiple universes. Now, first of all, we could say, well, maybe that seems like it's a little bit metaphysically extravagant that we've got all these universes just to explain away design. But we'll let that pass. one problem is that multiple universes don't necessarily explain design in the first place. Because, first of all, maybe there's not enough of them. Let's say that there was trillions and trillions of universes. That still wouldn't be enough to reverse the improbability of there being any life-permitting universes whatsoever. So, in the dartboard analogy, imagine that the bullseye is a micron large. Even if you threw a billion darts, it'd be unlikely to hit it. So, we would need to show that there's an extremely large number. So how do we know that there's that many universes, even if there is multiple universes? The other problem is that what if all the other universes have similar constants and quantities? So if there's some sort of universe generator that's producing these other universes, maybe it creates universes that are all pretty similar. So for example, you might have a factory that produces 1 million parts per year, but most of the parts are all almost identical. So if there's some sort of process like that creating universes, then it wouldn't prove that it's likely that any of the universes created would be one that permits life. So those are a couple of preliminary problems with the multiverse theory. But one of the bigger problems, though, is that multiverse models that have been proposed also require fine-tuning. They also need to have the constants and quantities just right in order to allow life to exist anywhere in the multiverse at all. So, for example, Robin Collins critiques Andre Lin's chaotic inflation multiverse, mentioning that there's 4 different mechanisms that need to be fine-tuned for this model to get off the ground. So it might be the case that multiple universes doesn't even escape the fine-tuning problem. But we now get to what I consider the Achilles heel of the multiverse hypothesis, which is that there's actually observational evidence against the multiverse being the reason that we have a life-permitting universe. The reason for this is as follows. Roger Penrose has calculated that the odds of a fine-tuned universe on just one of the parameters, he actually just considers the cosmological constant here. The odds of a fine-tuned universe is 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. He calculates, though, that the odds of our solar system forming by a random particle collision is 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 60. So what that basically means is, let's say you had a soup of fundamental particles, and given quantum indeterminacy, there's a particular chance that the entire solar system as we know it could pop into existence out of these assimilated particles. It sounds ridiculous, but the point is that, and it's extremely unlikely, 10 to the power 10 to the power 60 is not even a feasible number whatsoever. The point is that, as Roger Penrose says, it's utter chicken feed compared to the unlikelihood of a multiverse. What this means is that if the multiverse is the reason that we exist in a design or in a life-permitting universe, if that's the reason, we would expect to view things to be in a different universe. We'd expect to be in a universe where just our solar system popped into existence, not a universe where we can see that we've got a fully existent, fine-tuned universe as we're in. So, in fact, observational evidence is aligned against the theory of multiple universes explaining the design or the fine-tuning. So I think that we've seen that there's some pretty good arguments against the multiverse model, and we have no reason to think that the fine-tuning parameters are due to physical necessity. Therefore, these improbabilities need to be faced, and I think it's really remarkable when you really think about the numbers. It boggles the mind how accurate the designer of the universe would have to be. The designer of the universe would have to be far better than our best scientists at accuracy by magnitudes, well, which may not be that impressive depending on the view of our scientists, but you have to be far more accurate than even the most accurate device that we've created. The extraordinary fine-tuning of the universe is not only something that shows that God exists, but also kind of a demonstration of the Creator's power. Dr. Fred Hoyle, he's an atheist astronomer, he said, "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." All right, so we've looked at 2 powerful reasons to believe that God exists on the basis of modern science, modern physics, and rational argumentation. And so I think that we've shown that Dawkins' view that we live in a universe of blind, pitiless indifference is actually probably not the case. It does appear that we have every reason and every rational reason to accept that God does exist. And I think that this conclusion has very significant impact on the way that we answer those cosmic questions that I talked about previously. Who am I? Why am I here? What purpose do I have? Where am I going? On a view of the universe that includes God's existence, the answer to those questions might be very different. We haven't discussed much the nature of God or how God has perhaps related to his creatures, to us in this world. But I think that the strong evidence for the existence of a personal, extraordinarily powerful creator who intends to bring about intelligent life in the universe, I think that seeking more about his nature would be perhaps the primary thing we want to do if we want to discover the truth about reality and our purpose in this life. So with that being said, I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Okay. Bram's going to moderate, but while he's getting up here, I'd like to ask the first question, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
Sure, go ahead.
What is your view on the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ?
Well, that is an important topic, especially because we are in Easter weekend. And I do love discussing this topic. So I came up here to discuss the existence of God, and I took this talk purely from a theistic perspective.
Okay.
But I am, in fact, a Christian theist, and I do believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. That is my particular faith. And I do think that there are some good reasons to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. So, like I said in the conclusion, we've kind of left open the question of what is the nature of God and how has he related to his creatures. When my point there was that, okay, so we know, or we can reasonably believe that there is this enormously powerful creator of the universe. I think that it behooves us to seek out his nature. And so it seems to me a rational thing to do would be to look to see if God has revealed himself to us in any sort of revelation, whether in any sort of sacred text, any sort of current religion, or any sort of historical person. And so, as a Christian theist, I think that the best way that we can know that Christianity is true from a purely rational standpoint, beyond any sort of personal experience or religious conviction we may have, is based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's kind of the linchpin of the Christian faith. And we're in Easter weekend, so that's the view that Christians hold, is that Jesus Christ died on a Roman cross and 3 days later was resurrected. So I think that we would want to analyze this question from a historical aspect. And I think that there actually are some historical reasons that we can be confident that this event occurred, especially once we admit that there is a powerful creator of the universe, so thus a miracle such as the resurrection is perfectly feasible for that God. The first is that we have extremely good historical evidence that Jesus Christ died on a Roman cross. This is not only affirmed in the New Testament documents, but it's also affirmed in Tacitus and in other sources. It's considered to be one of the most secure facts we can know about Jesus, or really about any historical person. We have extremely good evidence that Jesus Christ died on a Roman cross. A second piece of evidence I think that we can determine, and this is without considering the Bible to be inerrant or even inspired, is the empty tomb. So we actually have pretty reasonably good evidence that the tomb was found empty. There's several reasons for this that I could get into if people want to discuss this further. But I'm talking about being able to analyze the actual documents of the New Testament as historical sources, not as religious texts. I think that we can determine there's actually pretty good evidence that the empty tomb is real. But even more easy to determine from historical studies is that there was almost certainly post-mortem appearances to Jesus, to Jesus' followers. This is especially important because there was the conversion of Saul of Tarsus and of Joseph, the brother of Jesus. We have very good evidence for the conversion of Paul because he has a biography in the New Testament documents where he talks about his conversion experience. And we also know that Joseph, who was not a believer during Jesus' life, did come to lead the church in Jerusalem. So these are interesting cases of people that are skeptical changing their perspective on Jesus and his ministry. Now, these post-mortem appearances are actually admitted by the majority of New Testament scholars, even those that don't believe in God. They might regard them as hallucinations or something like that, but the reality is that almost all accept that there were these appearances. And this is most accurately described by Paul in 1 Corinthians, where he lists the people that Jesus appeared to. There's also, of course, appearing stories in the Gospels. And then the fourth point would be the origination of the Christian faith in spite of severe disadvantages. So one of the most interesting things to me about the origin of the Christian faith is that unless there was a resurrection, the Christian faith should have died. If you look at what was happening in Jesus' ministry before the crucifixion, people were hoping for some sort of Messiah that would throw off the Romans and give the Jews back their promised land and their independence. So that's what they were hoping for. When Jesus was brutally murdered on the cross, that was a tremendous stain on the Christian movement. In fact, crucifixion at the time was known as the most dishonorable of deaths. It was regarded as a way to humiliate and completely degrade the victim. The pain, obviously, of crucifixion would be intense, but the real purpose of it by the Romans was to completely discredit the victim. So the Christian movement should have died at that point. There's just no reason to expect that these disciples would have all of a sudden come to follow this Messiah that they had followed before, who was killed on a Roman cross. They would have thought he was accursed by God, and all of the evidence we have in the Gospels show that only one disciple even followed him to the cross. So you have to have some sort of reason to understand why was there this Christian movement. It should have been snuffed out by the crucifixion. So I think the crucifixion is the preeminent evidence that Jesus Christ is who he claimed he was, and therefore that would give you a much more full version of Christian theism than the bare existence of God that I talked about tonight. But like I said before, I do think establishing the existence of God is important, because the theory, or the view, is that Jesus was risen from the dead by God, not that he miraculously rose like a zombie. But once we admit that God probably exists, then the miracle of raising someone from the dead is easy to accomplish if you can create the universe from nothing. So, next.
Raj Patel.
You presented very well what is available in this field. My question is that I would have been very happy to accept your proposition if all these things have come from Jesus or from scripture or from religion. It did not come from there. All scripture and religions and everybody, they fought every single step they fought. So why Jesus did not say all these things, what you told me today?
Why did Jesus not say, argue for the existence of God?
Not reveal all these very important things, that this is the universe, and and that is what I created, and this is like 13.2 billion years ago, and all this, everything you say in the last 45 minutes. Why Jesus did not reveal that?
Well, I think that the ministry of Jesus was not necessarily going to be advanced by talking about metaphysics and these arguments for the existence of God. That at the time they would not understand these arguments. He was in a culture where the existence of God was accepted, basically, and so he was teaching other things. So I don't know if there's any reason to expect that he would explain like cosmology and so forth to his followers. But I do think that Jesus was a preeminent revelation of God, and that's why he had a ministry of miracle performing to validate that he was divine. And I think that's also the reason for his death and resurrection on the cross, to provide revelation of God to mankind. But I don't know if there's necessarily any reason to think that Jesus would have done other things. He could have talked about anything, I suppose, but his ministry was focused on other things, I believe.
Yes.
Charlie.
Charlie.
Yeah, Kyle, you say there's historical evidence that accounts of Jesus he rose from the dead, but I recollect reading an academic article in an academic journal that there were historical accounts of about 8 other individuals who also rose from the dead about the same time. And these were historical records, archival records. Do you think that establishes what is your response to this historical evidence?
Well, historical evidence is inherently something where you have to evaluate.
Are they gods?
Well, I think that historical evidence is something you have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis. So if I was presented evidence to believe that these others that were reported to have been raised from the dead were, then I would be happy to consider that evidence. I do think that the resurrection of Jesus is a singularly more historically credible resurrection than others, but like I said, I'd be happy to hear arguments otherwise.
There's nothing singular about it.
Well, like for example, I think that the origination of the Christian faith is strong evidence for the resurrection, because it's the best explanation for why the Christian movement would thrive even after their supposed Messiah had been killed on the cross. There was no sort of vindication of his ministry, then I think that the Christian movement would have been snuffed out. I'm not sure that there's a parallel argument for the others that you mentioned. Maybe there is, but that's what I mean by singular. I mean, we have to look at the particular case in front of us.
No ice cream.
In my opinion, for the
One
historical.
follow-up.
Sure.
Also, this is commonly
Sorry.
stated that
you're
Jesus
gonna
is the
make the
composite
Yes.
of about 18 different individuals.
Sure, so like the
If you
Mithraism
go
religion
in
and so forth.
search of the historical Jesus,
You're talking about like Mithraism and other such like cults and so forth?
well, you know, they piece together stories
Sure.
from
So
any source, and there's no editor,
there's no editor?
no rules, no verification. And
Well, I think we'd have to look at whether or not it's plausible to suppose that the writers of the New Testament were based on creating or fabricating Jesus based on these other myths, say like under Mithraism and so forth. It used to be a very common argument in historical literature that Jesus was perhaps just a compilation of, say, Mithraism and some of the other cults at the time. That evidence is not nearly as persuasive these days. For example, there's evidence of borrowing the other way around. Oftentimes when people claim that, well, there was a dying and rising God, the reality was that the other religion is what copied Christianity. But I think a more of a fundamental point would be that Jews were very particular about their religious traditions and very almost kind of exclusive. And so therefore I don't think it would be very likely to want to borrow from these other myths that they just would have thought of as being vulgar and so forth. So I'm just not sure that there's any really good reason to think that the Jews who wrote the New Testament documents would have been likely to do such a thing. Moreover, I don't think that there's any evidence that there was any knowledge or relationship between these other religions. So let's say there was a religion like Mithraism that advocated a dying and rising God before Christianity arose. I'm not sure of any evidence that the authors of the New Testament documents had any knowledge of those religions. So, and so that's why I do think that there's been a little bit of a shift away in historical literature, in the historical arguments, from thinking that Jesus is probably a compilation of these other, other myths and so forth.
Doug Boucher.
Yeah, thank you. When you were, and earlier when you started out and all this, you said a lot of things in this talk, but I think going back to the beginning, you were doing cause and effect.
Yes.
And I think in Thomas Aquinas' arguments for the existence of God, in his logical framework, he comes to the conclusion that God is the uncaused cause. That's one part I want you to address. The other thing I want you to address as far as string theory is that it's kind of purported that there was a collision of two brains, B-R-A-N-E,
Yep.
that could have started this chain reaction of the universe. So, do
Certainly.
you have any insight into that? Which you'd comment on that?
I'll do my best, thanks. So the first question was about Aquinas' arguments for God. Yeah. So Aquinas, there's been a long tradition of arguing that God does exist, especially in Western faith traditions and like Christianity and Islam. And Aquinas was regarded as one of the preeminent theologians and persons who argued for the existence of God. He actually argued for the existence of God on what's called basically an argument from contingency, because Aquinas didn't know whether or not the universe began to exist. Therefore, he structured his argument for God's existence based on the existence of the universe purely on the fact that the universe is contingent and not necessary. And this argument, this version of the argument, does not rely on the beginning of the universe. So I do think that it's a good argument. The reason that I focused on the argument from the origin of the universe is because Aquinas actually said that, well, if the universe began to exist, then obviously God exists. He just couldn't argue from that premise because he wasn't privy to the scientific evidence that we have now. But I think that the origin of the universe proves that the universe could not be a brute fact. The fact that it began to exist really cries out for an explanation, even more than just the contingent existence of the universe. So basically, Aquinas was arguing that even if the universe existed to eternity past, you could still argue that God would need to be responsible for the creation of the universe because the universe was not a necessary thing. Does that answer your question?
Well, that's your answer.
Fair enough.
I was hoping you would address the uncaused cause, but
Okay, so what do you mean by address the uncaused cause? I'm sorry.
Well, that was his ultimate conclusion, that everything is a cause and effect, and if you follow it to its ultimate logical conclusion, then God would be the uncaused cause for the universe existing.
Yes, certainly. I do think that we have to say that God is uncaused, and even the argument that I mentioned, he's an uncaused cause, because God would exist from eternity past. He would be a necessary being and have no cause. If God had a cause, then we could ask what caused that cause and so forth. We'd have an infinite regress of causes, and I think that's what Aquinas was trying to avoid, is the infinite regress. I do think it makes sense that we need to have a terminus of explanation. And so that's where you get into the question, okay, what's the terminus of explanation? Is it God? Is it a personal creator? Or is it the universe itself that's a brute fact? So I'm just arguing that the evidence for the origin of the universe proves that the universe itself can't be the brute fact, the terminus of the causal chain. But God is still a plausible terminus of the causal chain, so that you avoid a causal an infinite regress, because he could exist from eternity past, unlike the universe, right? All right, so then your other question was on string theory, correct?
Collision of brain.
M-brain theory, right? That's So string theory is definitely on the speculative end of current cosmology, but there are a lot of adherents of the theory. Unfortunately for string theory, it is victim to the Borguth-Blanken theorem. So it's proven that even on the hypothesis of string theory, even if string theory is true, we would still know that the universe had to have a beginning based on that theorem. So I do think that string theory is an exciting form of research, and it's possible that if string theory is true, then it is a version of the multiverse, because the M brains that you're referring to that collide create pocket universes whenever they collide, and so forth. And I believe on string theory, the view is that there would be something like 10 to the 500 universes created by this M brain cosmology. So the string theory used to be used primarily as an argument against the design argument. You could say, well, there's 10 to the 500, which is quite a few, so thus we're likely to have one with life. But that's why the other arguments that I mentioned against the multiverse, I think, are evident against that theory.
Okay, and Andy Anderson.
I have a question. Two questions really. I mean, they're both related, but what benefit do you think humanity will achieve if people, the majority of us come to believe that the universe was created by God? If that suddenly became a universal belief, how do you think it would move humanity forward? And the second thing is, how old do you think the universe is? When roughly does it show the scriptures when God created it?
Okay. So what impact God's existence would have would depend on the nature of God. So in my opinion, the evidence that I discussed in the main arguments prove that God at least has an interest in us, and that he intended to create intelligent, rational creatures. That's what the design argument gets us. If the resurrection of Jesus Christ is true that we discussed here, then that would prove that God is even more intimately involved and interested in a personal relationship with each one of us. So if, on my view, God is not simply an uncaused cause and so forth, but is also a perfect being, the greatest possible being, and therefore humanity benefits immensely from having a personal relationship with God, and I believe that's what God desires for all of us. So I do think that there would be basically unending benefits from people accepting that truth and being reconciled to full communion with God. That's what I believe the entire Christian story is about, is the process of reconciling humans to God in some sort of relationship. But if God is simply a deist God, an uncaused cause who created the universe for fun but doesn't really care about us, it would maybe have less of an impact on our day-to-day lives, other than it'd be an interesting thing to know that God existed, I think. But yeah, I do think that the impact that God's existence has on our day-to-day lives depends very much on what God is like and how he relates to us.
How old when do you think God created the universe?
I do believe that God created at the moment of the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago approximately. That is, I think, the best current scientific evidence. And so I know that this is an intramural Christian debate as far as whether or not the universe was created long ago, or if it was created, say, 6,000 or 10,000 years ago. I think that's an internal Christian debate, and I think that you can have plausible arguments one way or the other as far as what the Genesis narrative indicates as far as the age of the earth. I don't think that, in my opinion, even a conservative reading of Genesis doesn't force you to accept that the universe was created 6 or 10,000 years ago. And I just don't think that the current evidence shows that that would be the case. In fact, even before the advent of modern, modern Big Bang cosmology that showed the universe to be about 13 billion years old, even before that, the church theologian Augustine, in about the year in the 400s, argued that you can't really know based on the Genesis narrative when God created. So,
Good for him.
What's that?
Good for him.
And I don't think that Augustine was not influenced by, like I said, obviously by modern scientific theory. So I don't think we have to say that, well, Christians are retreating to say that the universe is 14 billion years old, because without that scientific evidence, they would all think that it was 6,000 years old. There's been a variety of Christian views on this, just like a lot of different topics, and I think that that's an intramural Christian debate. I think.
Yes, Tim Ball.
Can you give us a little bit about your personal encounter with God and why you got into this, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised in a Christian home, and at a very young age, I believe it was in 7th grade, I guess it's not that young, but I kind of had a little bit of a crisis of faith, because I just started to think, well, how can I really know that what I believe is true? I've been brought to believe this is just simply a matter of me accepting what my parents told me. So I decided to look into that myself, because I wanted to determine if it was true or not. I've always been extremely cautious about making sure that I think through these things carefully and consciously, because I recognize that I was brought up in a Christian home, and so I have to be careful that that doesn't cloud my thinking as far as evaluating the objectivity of the arguments. That was something that I was always concerned with. That's why I actually started a website my junior year of high school called the skepticalchristian.com. And it's vastly out of date at this point. There is a relaunch supposedly pending. But in that website, I tried to put forward some arguments that I thought were evidence that God existed and that Christian theism was true, and to engage with others who have different views. So I've interacted with people on these arguments in public speaking, in internet chat rooms, which is not a good place to do this, trust me, and all sorts of other forums, and it's something that I'm personally fascinated with and always have been from a young age. The reason I called it the website The Skeptical Christian was because I felt that there was kind of a bias and assumption that if anybody has any sort of if they're a free thinker, or if they're not tied down to dogmatism and simply believe in what they're told, then they would never, believe that Christianity is true. My point of titling the website that was, I believe that you can be inquisitive and even skeptical of arguments and so forth, and still come to a rational belief that God exists, as I've argued today, and that Christian theism is true. So that was the reason I named the website that. It was a little bit of a kind of a counterintuitive name, but that's why I did that.
In, 5,000-10,000 years, whatever, we've made a lot of progress materialistically, but moralistically, the atrocities today, are as great as they were. I don't think we've progressed in 5,000 years as human beings. The atrocities.
Yeah.
Maybe yes.
Either it's God's fault or it's our fault. If it's our fault, then maybe we need to examine, re-examine that all the religions, all the answers that we think we have aren't really the answers. Because I don't think it's God's fault, so it's our fault. And if it's our fault, I think we need to re-examine maybe from scratch, because the answers we have, I don't think are the answers. What do you think about that?
Are you saying that you think that religion has so far failed to improve our morality overall?
I don't think religion is the answer. Maybe even it's what's stopping us from progressing.
Sure.
Because we think we know everything. And if we knew everything, I think we would have progressed in 5,000 years beyond. I don't think we've really progressed, you know, materialistically. Yeah, we can blow up the whole universe with the H-bomb, but I don't think that's the kind of progress that, I don't know.
Yeah, I do think it's true that it's maybe disappointing the level of moral progress that we've made as a society. Some argue that we have made a lot of progress. Steven Pinker argues that, in fact, we participate in much less bloodshed and war now than we did in the past. So,
How you can say that?
what's that? Well, he was talking about like.
How you can say that? There's more bloodshed in the 20th century than.
All right, let him answer your question.
That's okay, no
Yeah,
problem.
no speeches.
I'm not necessarily agreeing with Steven Pinker. I'm just saying that I think it may be an open question as far as whether or not we've progressed. I think in some ways it seems like we've made progress. In some ways we've gone backwards. According to Christian doctrine, the problem that we have is, like you say, it's our problem. It's our sin nature. And according to Christian theism, just because you believe in God is not going to determine that you will always do good things. I think that you're right that we need to take responsibility for our own sin, our wrongdoing, the wars and the atrocities that we commit. I really, in my opinion, it's actually evidence that the doctrines of Christianity as far as our sin nature is true, because despite our progress, like you say, there's still, it seems, an ineradicable kind of core evil that permeates human society.
I'll give Susie.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, you mentioned about, I don't know, the characteristics. I'm wondering if maybe the concept about responsibility, we need to take responsibility. I wonder if the belief in the devil or evil keeps us, if that's a scapegoat, and it keeps us from taking responsibility ourselves, and maybe that's one of the reasons we haven't progressed that much, because, oh, it's the devil.
The devil made me do it.
The devil made me do it.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, whether or not the devil is involved or, in any sort of circumstance, I do think it's a scapegoat if it's used as a way to excuse yourself from immoral behavior, and that is unfortunate. I'm confident that humans would always be have enough ingenuity to come up with a scapegoat when needed, even if religion was completely rejected. I think if you look at societies where maybe atheism was more widespread, it doesn't necessarily eradicate that kind of core, like, kind of inner sort of evil that there is in human society. You look at some of the more like atheistic regimes and so forth, and there was, in many cases, a lot of bloodshed and so forth there as well. So religion can be used as a scapegoat, just like totalitarianism or any political philosophies can be used as scapegoats. I think it gets more to the nature of humans than it does to the nature of God, as far as the fact that we'll kind of use whatever excuse we need to.
But we were created in God's image. He must be evil.
Gene Anderson has the next question, but we'll put you on the list.
I want to understand how to do it. Understand if you said that in school, that's about the time to.
Why don't-
My question, to follow up on the gentleman's question over there, when he mentioned the devil, and you said that, in so many words, I'm not quoting, that you should ignore that and we're responsible for our action, right? Did
Yeah.
you say something like that?
Certainly. What I was saying is even if Satan, say, was some sort of influence on our actions, even if that was the case, I think that we should take responsibility for our actions.
But if we responded to your God in the same way, could we ignore him too?
Could we ignore God?
Right. And follow our own conscience and do what we want to do?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or should we do something else because of your God?
Good question. So I think the question gets at, can we behave morally without accepting God or listening to God and so forth? In addition to the fact I think we have a sin nature, it is also a part of Christian teaching, and I think, and also a fact that can be well evidenced, that we all have a conscience, and with the exception of maybe extreme cases of psychopaths and so forth, we have an inner knowledge of right and wrong. And I think that we can use that inner conscience to act rightly or wrongly without reference or even belief in God. And in fact, sometimes those who don't believe in God are more moral than many Christians, and that should be a cause of shame for those who follow Christ or any religious tradition. But I don't think that we would need to accept that God exists to understand and know the moral code that is part of our nature as well, or the conscience that's part of our nature. Does that answer your question?
Glenn Chipley. Okay, I have two problems with your argument. Both of them, I think, involve ambiguities. And it's a trade-off, and I think both of them are based on metaphor. The first one is design, and the second one is causality. Design is a human term that we use when I design something. I have something in mind to make it do it.
Thank you.
Yes.
You can use that metaphorically relative to items of nature, which I don't do. But when you push that back to God, then you have a problem, because God, you're saying that God creates this universe. He has to have in mind a universe that's going to work, according to your own argument. Okay, which means that there must be some kind of a plan or rules out there aside from God that he knows this is going to work and this isn't going to work. So now suddenly you've got, to my mind, an ambiguity on that. The second one is cause, and cause, I think, also is a problem because causes are ultimately big causes. It's a human thing that we're looking for for an answer to some kind of question.
Sure.
Both of these things are putting demands on explanation that maybe explanation can't accomplish. So I think you've got two ambiguities: the ambiguity relative to design and one relative to cause. And scientists don't look for causes; scientists look for rules. They look for laws. They look for laws of nature. Causality is something that physicians maybe look for, but it's a metaphor. All these things are metaphors, and to give them kind of necessary.
Is there a question in this?
So concerning the ambiguity you said with the design, I'm sorry, I wasn't quite understanding the root concern that you're having with
We
this.
design tools.
We design tools, yes.
Okay, which means for a purpose.
Yeah.
For something that we want to accomplish. We don't design hydrogen.
So we wouldn't design something that has no purpose, right? So we're saying.
Right, but that's a human thing. And what
Sure.
I'm saying is now when you push that back, when we do this, the design is good because it works, right?
Sure.
It works only because matter has certain properties, and we know about there's laws of nature and so on. A bad design isn't going to work.
Sure.
Right? But that's because there are laws, and because matter has property and all this stuff already. When you try pushing that back to the very beginning, and you say God has a design in mind, then that implies that there is something outside of God that's going to work or not work.
Okay.
So if you're going to use the human analogy of design, and if you're not, then you're going to have to use some other word.
Well, I think that God would be a designer if he did create the universe for a purpose. So the question would be whether or not the universe meets his purpose as the designer, right?
What's the purpose?
Well, that would depend on what you think God's purpose is. Perhaps his
No,
purpose
it would
is...
depend on what I think. It would depend on what God thinks.
Sure. What I'm saying is that it's possible that we don't know God's purpose for creating the universe. That's possible, right? And in fact, it may be plausible that we don't know because, how can we know, the mysteries of God? But I think that it's plausible to suppose that God purposed to create intelligent agents. I think that's what the argument shows. So therefore, it seems that he wants to have other intelligent agents, probably or possibly for communion with those agents. So God is a personal being. I think that God has a purpose for creating a universe with personal beings as well. I think at least that's a plausible understanding. It's possible that we just don't know what his purpose was. If the universe is purposeless, then I agree that the design analogy would not work, but we would have to show or know that God didn't have a purpose for the creation of the universe.
Would you do agree that it's a human metaphor?
I do agree that we have to use human metaphors in these arguments. So if you completely reject the use of metaphor, then perhaps the arguments wouldn't go through. But I'm not sure that there is a problem with using these metaphors. I think that they can be valid, in my opinion.
All right, the gentleman sitting in the back here.
I was going to compliment you on your knowledge and the way you presented the issues here. Very good.
Thank you.
The question is, did you get all this information together yourself to make this presentation? Or is this an offshoot or part of a bigger presentation that you're aware of or part of?
Well, I did create this one basically from scratch. I did, cull from past presentations I've done. But I tried to reference a lot of research. That's why I have some quotes from others to kind of, I'm not obviously a theoretical physicist, so I wanted to be able to back up the arguments I was saying with relevant quotations from the scientific literature and so forth. But yeah, I mean, the presentation was put together by me. It's a result of my research into this issue. I read a lot on both sides of the issue. I've read all the New Atheist books, God Is Not Great, The God Delusion, The Miracle of Theism by J.L. Mackie, which I think is actually much better, as well as, Christian or theistic arguments. So I tried to read broadly so that I would have a good understanding and as much as possible an unbiased understanding of the issues. But, like I said, I did try to base the statements that I made on reputable arguments that are made in the literature as well.
Thank you.
You've given us a lot of good reasons for believing in the Christian faith. Now, could you give us some reasons why we should believe that we would like to be a Cub fan?
All right. Go on.
I have to say no comment to that one.
Believe me, that requires a lot of prayer.
All right, get real. Come on.
Young lady over here.
First, I just want to say thank you for your presentation. And as a former preschool teacher, there are a lot of students that I had that talked about God and His existence, and some parents actually did not want us to talk about it. Do you personally recommend that we keep God out of the school system, and why or why not?
Wow, that's a controversial question.
Repeat the question if you don't mind.
Yeah, the question is whether or not should we keep God out of the school system or not? One thing would depend on is whether or not you're at a Christian education institution. Obviously, if you are at a Christian or even an Islamic education institution, then you would have the right to talk about God in such a setup. The tougher question is in the public schools. I actually do tend to think that in public schools, I don't think that individuals should have to hide their faith or not answer questions when asked and so forth. But I do think that it would be improper to, preach in the context of being at a public school as like a public school teacher, your faith convictions. But I don't think we have to hide what we believe or shy away from answering questions. There's no reason to completely shelter ourselves, and we can be open about our faith, our beliefs. The same would go for our political beliefs as well. Some of us have very deeply ingrained, deeply held political beliefs. Should we preach those in the public schools to students? Probably not, but do we have to pretend that we're not partisans of some particular political belief system? Probably not either. So I think there can be a balance there.
Everybody else. In line with some of the other questions you got, how do we either defend or protect ourselves from false gods? Or, for example, the Bible has stories about gay rights, non-gay rights, how to treat them, stories about Adam and Eve with some mysterious others there. And the point about teaching in school, how do we protect ourselves from false gods, which are basically things that humans create out of nothing, which have an element of truth, but just an element.
Sure. Well, there's a couple different ways that we could try to at least come to a personal resolution for what we believe about God. One way would be through personal experience. That's not something I've really talked about. The reality is the vast majority of religious believers probably don't know about string theory and the evidence for the cosmological constant fine-tuning and so forth. That's really not what founds most people's faith, I don't think. I think most people believe that they have a personal experience with God. God is directly present to them in their lives. And I think that's very possible, and I think that could be a rational way to have a faith, a rational thing to believe, if God has presented himself to you and he is real in your life. So that would be one way, is personal experience. One reason that I like looking at the external evidence, such as for the nature of God that we can find through these kind of arguments, or from God's revelation that we can find through, say, arguments for Jesus and arguments from Scripture and so forth, is I think that they can help to be like an objective standard that's outside of your own personal experience. So if these arguments are independently valid of your own personal experience, then they can help to make sure that you do stay away from false gods. In my view, Christianity is true, and therefore the evidence does align with that. So I think that these kind of arguments do tend to reinforce the personal faith that Christians have. That's my view as a Christian theist. So that's the way I think that we can try to guard against false gods in our lives. Does that answer your question? No?
It gets hard.
Is there any way that you could follow up on that?
People have been so creative and so strong, have developed such strong beliefs in many, many, many things that I really don't know how to protect myself, given the history of humans, from belief in from either belief in a false God or false beliefs in God.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's any real easy answer to this question. I mean, it's a similar problem when it comes to our political beliefs and so forth. How do we know that we're not going down the wrong path with our political beliefs or with our moral beliefs? This is also an issue that's difficult. I think that we just have to do the best we can with the intelligence and the opportunities that we have to understand the nature of reality, of God, morality, politics, and so forth. All of these issues, they're very complex, but we just have to do the best we can. I don't think there's necessarily an easy answer. There's no guarantees that we're not going to come to wrong conclusions based on arguments and so forth.
Bob Lichtenberg has had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, keeping up with all the books on this topic, but I want to go back to the Middle Ages and also today, though, talking about causes. What is the sense of saying God is the cause of the universe when the universe is physical and the causes are physical, but God is not physical, God is spiritual, immaterial as we call it.
Yes.
Does it make sense to say that God is the cause of the universe? Or this is what Aquinas says when he calls God the uncaused cause. But isn't he contradicting himself there? And he's saying that it's got to be a string of causes to explain everything physical that exists, but there doesn't have to be one at the start.
So I think we have to be careful not to just sort of give God an escape card, get out of jail free card, so, he just doesn't apply to the causal principle. I think we need to have real reasons to believe that God could be the uncaused cause. I think that goes back to believing that God has existed for eternity, either timelessly or in time. One way or the other, God would have to exist from eternity past. And I think that is the only way to get an end to the issue of cause, to have an uncaused cause, is to have something that's eternal. Like I mentioned with the universe, if the universe was eternal, then I think that could be perhaps a plausible view that, the universe just has always existed. It's a brute fact. I think that the origin of the universe proves that it can't be a brute fact, so I think that God as an uncaused cause makes more sense given that information.
I thought you didn't want any fries.
So you had the question about God as an uncaused cause. You had another question, I believe?
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Well, no, but aren't you giving God an escape from jail card now by saying the Big Bang proves the universe is not eternal? I realize there's a lot of evidence for the Big Bang.
Sure. So, but what I'm saying is that is contingent. It could be that the Big Bang, there was no evidence for it. What if the evidence showed that the universe had always existed? Then God would, at that point, maybe wouldn't be a better explanation than an infinite or eternal universe. So that's why I think the evidence is fascinating, because it could have turned out otherwise. Perhaps the universe could have been eternal, but I think the evidence shows it's not, and therefore it's good evidence for God's existence, because God, therefore, is the only realistic, or a personal agent of some sort, is the only realistic uncaused cause that we could turn to, in my opinion.
All right. Thank
All right, David, Travis, and then this lady over here. Jean Holbert.
It has been said that Christianity was born in the Middle East and was taken to Greece where it became a philosophy, and later was taken to Rome where it became a religion, and spread throughout Europe where it became a culture, and was later taken to America where it became big business.
Fair enough.
In view of the fact that certain people have indicated that Saul, who later became the apostle, in collaboration with the king of Emperor of Rome, I don't remember what his name was, Constantine or what, he rewrote, or rather wrote Christianity in the way that he wanted. So he went to all through the Middle East, gathering all the stories, writings, everything he could.
Okay.
And then he wrote Christianity the way he wanted it, and the way that King Constantine wanted it.
Okay.
And then Rome adopted Christianity as their official religion, because that way they would have control. In view of things like that, then, wouldn't it be much better to take a point of view of a deist toward God, the same as our founding fathers did?
Okay. Well, so there are two issues here dealing with the historical development of Christianity. One is Paul and how he may have influenced the development of the faith. The other would be Constantine. Now, Paul and Constantine actually were separated by quite some time. The Christian faith did not become a state religion for quite some time until Constantine, hundreds of years after Paul. Paul did have a remarkable influence on the spread of the Christian faith. That certainly is true. And a lot of the writings in the New Testament are from the Apostle Paul. However, I don't think it's very likely that Paul sort of created Christianity from scratch and so forth. In fact, he does relate about the Jerusalem Council, where Paul went back to Jerusalem to meet with the Jewish leaders of the faith there to confirm that the things that he had learned about Jesus Christ were true, and that that he was teaching the correct doctrine. So I do think that there's good reason to think that Paul does represent the Christian faith accurately, as far as what the rest of the disciples and so forth believed in that initial development of Christianity. But certainly Paul had a huge impact on the spread of Christianity, and who knows what Christianity would have been like if Paul had not been around to spread it pretty far and wide. So like I said, though, Christianity did not become a state religion for quite some time until the Emperor Constantine adopted it. According to Constantine, he adopted it because his mother was a Christian, and he prayed to the Christian God, who then granted him supposedly a victory in a battle. And it's an interesting question whether or not Constantine actually was a legitimate believer, or if he used Christianity for political expediency. I'm not really sure, and that's kind of maybe between Constantine and God as far as that goes. But I think that we could see the development of the Christian faith as a providential act of God to spread the faith far and wide. So when you look really at the origin of the faith, it was a persecuted minority faith for quite some time until Constantine adopted it. At which point it did spread quickly, but when you become the state religion, unfortunately you lose a little bit of the devotional purity of your followers, because now it becomes politically expedient to be a Christian. There's advantages and disadvantages of being the state religion in those times. The advantages is you're not getting killed for your beliefs and so forth, and in fact you might have more access to political office, but of course, like I mentioned, that also can lead to conflicting motives and intentions. So the way I look at it is that God used Constantine, whether Constantine was a legitimate believer or not, as a way to spread the Christian faith to a larger demographic than would have been possible if Christianity had remained to be a persecuted religion. But, if Christianity is false, then we could view these as historical contingencies. If Christianity is true, I think we could view them as the providence of God. And it is true that Christianity has had a lot of success as far as at least spreading its message pretty far and wide. I do agree, unfortunately, with your view that sometimes religion becomes big business, which is unfortunate, and certainly not something that Jesus would have advocated. After all, he did overturn the money changers' tables in the temple. So I think that some modern-day Christians could take a page out of that book, and sometimes modern-day Christians don't really behave the way Jesus would behave at all.
Yeah, oh, Dan.
No, she had a question over here first, Brown.
What?
The lady over here.
Oh, that's right, Jean.
What does time, the concept of time, if there was no time, there would be nothing. And time, what does time have to do with God?
That is a good question. So the nature of time is one of the most difficult philosophical questions. And philosophers struggle mightily with time, what does it mean, and so forth. Even though intuitively we have a pretty, it seems like we know what time is. One philosopher said that when you ask, when I don't think about it, I know what time is. When you ask me what time is, I don't know what it is anymore. So, what's that?
It's a magazine.
It's a magazine? I like that. That's a much easier answer than what I'm trying to bumble through here. But so philosophers are split on two basic views of time. One of which is that time is what's called tensed, and there are relations of earlier than, later than. Another view of time is what's known as the tenseless theory of time, which is that things don't really come into or go out of existence, but time exists all at once. And so we just kind of go through different slices of time, even though everything already exists timelessly, which is a difficult concept to grasp, and therefore I don't think a very plausible view of time. How time relates to God, in my view, is that without the universe, without the Big Bang, there is no time. God exists timelessly. It's possible that God would exist in a metaphysical time or some sort of time we don't know about. It's difficult to parse if that could be possible. In my view, though, there is no time without the universe, and God exists timelessly with a will and an intention, and he decides to create the universe in time. At which point, in my view, God actually does enter time, because God is a relational God, and in order to actually even know what time it is currently, God would have to be existent now, not some eternal or timeless God that looks down at all of creation. But I think that God is in time. I think that that was a choice that he made when he decided to create a temporal universe. I think that on Christian doctrine, it's even more obvious that God is in time currently, because if you believe in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, then clearly Jesus existed in time. So that is my view of time, that without the universe, God is timeless. He decides to create the universe, at which point he enters into time in a similar way that he enters into the world as Jesus Christ in Christian doctrine later in the story.
And speaking of time, we got one more question.
We gotta go to rebuttals.
We gotta go to rebuttals.
Yeah. Yeah, hurry up.
All right, yeah. John Lennon said, God is a concept by which we measure our pain. What do you think about that?
It's poetry.
God is a concept by which we measure our pain?
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure I understand what he's trying to say.
You have a lot of pain. You have problems. You lose your wife. You get your broken leg. You fail in school.
Let me go ahead and
you get in an accident on Western Avenue.
Sure.
God did it.
Go ahead and ask my
so
questions.
you're blaming God for your problems, and also you go to God for your problems. So God is a concept by which we measure how much we hurt inside. Now, what do you think about that?
Well, you could say that that's true, either on the theory that God exists or if he doesn't. If John Lennon is trying to say that we don't really have any reason to believe in God, he's just something we invented in order to place our pain onto or to pray to and hope that God will do something and so forth. So maybe a psychological crutch. Now, on the hypothesis that atheism is true, that maybe is a plausible theory of why we believe in God. But the fact that there's maybe a motivation to believe in God doesn't prove one way or the other whether or not God exists. I think we'd have to look through the arguments for whether or not God exists one way or the other.
All right, let's go to rebuttals.
Yes, one brief question.
Hurry up.
Thank you, Charlie. Number one, the rock group Chicago asked, does anybody really know what time it is? And two, in case for those who don't, it is time for rebuttals.
All right.
Let's send our speaker.
We gotta do this guy's work, man. All right, thanks,
How
Kyle.
many people have remarks to make to the rest of us?
I want a witness.
All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
The spirit has
7, 8,
filled me.
9, 10, possibly 11.
You have to be out here by 9, that's
All
40
right,
minutes.
11, how much time do we have?
Probably
Very
about
brief in my follow-ups. So.
probably about 4 minutes apiece, if that.
Wow.
Try to make your remarks succinct.
Yeah, we've heard all of them, your gibberish before, anyway.
I've got a timing.
After that, Tim Bulger here, our timekeeper and recorder, will signal you that your time has elapsed.
Let's thank our speaker one more time. All right, rebuttals.
Okay, you sinners,
Joe, Bear,
repent.
I want to congratulate our speaker on the fact that he has acquainted himself in some detail with the arguments that are opposed to his personal beliefs. I think he did a pretty good job of it. However, when I was in the educational process of becoming an astrophysicist, one of the lecture halls at the university on the top floor in the Ryerson building, there was a legend that was carved into wood above the door that you entered for the graduate courses in astrophysics. And it said, if you can't convince them, confuse them. And I think that's appropriate to the way our speaker has presented his arguments today. First of all, I find it highly improbable that a human being, an intelligent human being, would ignore the findings of science and invent a scheme that requires a creator, a designer. Perhaps it's done out of fear and ignorance, fear of the unknown and ignorance of the ramifications of science. I don't think that cause and effect have been demonstrated, perhaps in the macro world, but in the micro world, in the quantum world, there is no cause and effect. Things can happen simultaneously. An electron can be in two places at once, for example. There's no need for cause and effect in those cases. So what we really have is a branch of science that is in direct contradiction to the philosophy of the theists. I recall in the 1860s there was a German philosopher who wrote a treatise, a book. It was called The Philosophy of Poverty. And Karl Marx read the book and wrote an answer to it, in which the title of the book that Marx wrote was The Poverty of Philosophy.
Go repent. Repent for your sins, Joe.
Gene Horker, thank you. Thank you, Joe Bear.
I can never see here. I'm a Unitarian Universalist, so I found this talk very interesting. The fourth principle of a Unitarian Universalist is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So we're always searching around for truth. We have 7 principles. No Unitarian Universalist has to accept any one, and no church has to accept any one, but most Unitarian Universalists agree with those 7 principles. And like most Unitarian Universalists, I came from another religion. I was a Catholic. And I did get 2 things from my Catholic background that stuck with me, even though I'm a Unitarian Universalist. One is the idea of examining your conscience.
So I always try to look at myself and look in the mirror and hold myself to a standard. Of course, since I'm not a Catholic anymore, all the beliefs have changed, so my morality is far different than I would be if I were a Catholic. So most Unitarians don't talk too much about conscience. But one thing they do, they occasionally talk about the other thing I got from my background, which is the concept of sin. They don't usually call it sin, they usually call it missing the mark. So I took that idea, and believe me, I'm a sinner. I keep missing the mark all the time. I can't seem to, but I keep trying. I'll say that. The final thing is that a lot of Unitarian Universalists are lousy singers. The reason is they're trying to read the hymn to see if they agree with the wording. So one thing that I hear the most Unitarians sing very loudly about is when we talk about source of all. That is a Unitarian idea that most Unitarians can sing to. Thank you.
Stay away from those unis. Yeah, next. I hang around with them. It'll still be nuts.
Gary Riley.
Hi. One of the conundrums I've been faced with my entire life is that, first of all, being raised a Catholic, I of course was, put into a school system throughout my entire life that, required a belief in God. And at the same time, I grew up in an area of Illinois where I was near Mazon Creek, and I was frequently found skipping fossils into the lakes nearby. And so, the conundrum, I guess where I've come down on it is, let science be science, let faith be faith. And what I've heard here tonight is a wonderful argument, using the powers of logic, and even using the facts of science, although I did note a few errors that were made tonight on that count. But using logic is a very powerful way to argue for the existence of God. But on the other hand, I was told by a very influential priest in my Catholic education, Father Paul, that I should never let others define for me who God is. God is a personal experience that you have. And so to use science as an argument in favor of God means that if you follow science, you are proving for everyone an existence or a possibility. So if we follow the logical conclusion here, if we follow the premise that you can define and understand God through scientific arguments, then we're in effect defining what God is for everyone. And I'd much rather leave it a matter of personal discovery throughout one's life. I think the speaker, and I apologize for your name, Kyle. I think Kyle really hit the nail on the head. In one of the questions, someone asked him where this using of scientific evidence leads. And Kyle said that it serves his personal belief. And I think that's really what it's about. I think that one should not cross the ideas or the aims of science with the mysterious and our humble attempt to know God. So, but I do thank Kyle for coming here tonight and presenting his arguments. Thank you.
Gina. Last speaker.
Cool.
Yeah, he was right on. I'm gonna give the speaker A+ for his speech, and I like that type of ability to be able to express and explain and give a good speech to the audience. However, after giving him a C on the material that he used, how should I want to say that? In other words, he used, like somebody said, he used science and he used some quotes from certain book writers and so forth and so on. People, let me say this. Give anybody a vocabulary, a pencil, and some paper, and they can write a beautiful script that has nothing to do with facts and so forth and so on. Now, if you think I'm lying, go and read the classics. All of that was made up, ain't no facts there. So, when he gives these quotes and so forth, it doesn't mean nothing. I was baptized as a kid like everybody else in Mississippi that was 9 years old or 10 years old. And therefore, I was came out of Baptist Christian. However, like Descartes said, it's taken me 40 years to get over all of that stuff that they was teaching me. Somebody mentioned St. Paul. St. Paul said, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I'm no longer a child, so I give that stuff up. Now, at one time, I would have to accept what the chickadee preacher said, or the boy chasing priest said about God and so forth. But when you got older, and you come in contact with people like he mentioned, Leibniz, Hobbes, Descartes, Spinoza, Kant, all of these people talked about the same thing we are talking about tonight. And I would have to put them in the heavy category, people like Kant, people like Spinoza. However, they didn't have the answer that sound like what he was saying. Most of them said, I don't know what God is and so forth. And they leave that to, in some other, like Leibniz call it the domos, that others call substance, others call had other names. And they recognize that no human being can stand up and describe God and tell what he intended, what he's making and so forth. That is ridiculous. Even if I could believe, how could I buy that? I'm saying you're going to anthropomorphize God. How silly can it be? You're going to use your science about time and space and say God is subject to that same type of interpretation of time and space. Here's somebody that, according to so-called Christians, been around forever. He didn't have no beginning. And here's somebody with a beginning go tell me all about him. He'll be a great king.
Oh, go ahead, buddy, go ahead. Whoa.
Before I came here, I had a bad argument with my godson. I said, we are going to go to church tomorrow. He said, no.
Church,
And
no. Church.
I wanted him to go to church because he can meet people and he can know people, and it's good to meet people. And I'm the last person who, I don't believe in God. In my deepest, darkest hours, I never thought of God. Because, hey, if those want to, God is, if you believe God, it's good for you. If you don't believe, forget it. Okay? And I think that this kind of things don't entertain me, and I don't feel good about that. Those kind of discussion in a world, well, twisted, things are twisted. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about my things, my personal thing. Okay, now, finally, I'm retiring after 60 years of witness. You know, so you know, and I had a good life, and sooner or later, and I'm at peace with myself, and in a death or in a life, I'm equanimous, and I can accept anything without any remorse or without any pleasure. In my family, I have some family news, as you know, I tell about my family news. One of my nieces adopted a black child, and one of my nephews is married to Chinese. So now we have a Chinese, black, Jews, white, Muslims, all in our family. And do you know, we live peacefully. And I think that's godly, if there is anything godly. And then about India, there is some news. India, they have election, 810 million people will be voting. About 60 to 70% expected to vote. The couple of things very interesting is that,
He's got a whole United Nations.
which I found interesting, they have a third sex for registration. That is for, what do you call it, transgender. That is accepted and one transgender candidate is running for the office of parliament. And second thing they have is that, let's see, I got to look, okay, I forgot. Getting old. Okay, let's see. And what they have second, election will last for about 1 month, and I lost somewhere. Anyway, what is happening is that they have very few problems and almost everybody able to vote because and voting with a machine. So they have so many people, millions of people voting with a machine, and they have no problem. Why do we have problem here in America? We have machines problem, we have a registration problem, they have no registration problem. They have registration, people have when they go to vote, they put what do you call it, they put ink. Just like your nightclub when you put ink, they put ink once you register. So the election is certainly each area, election is 1 day. So register, you put it and that's it, done. And they have no problem. Other good thing happening is that the guy who is going to be a chief minister or the president of the country, 1 second, okay, give me 30 seconds. He refused visa by all the white countries. So now there is a big problem. All Europe and America and Canada is not giving him visa to come here for last 10 years.
Okay.
And now he's going to be the leader.
Thank you very much. Our next rebutter is Charlie Peda, who is our organizer and producer, who puts together the program, and it's all his.
I'm gonna be real quick so you can
Give it for
Charlie. All right, let's yay for our speaker. All right, you're looking up tonight. I don't see the heavyweight atheist here tonight. If you want to meet them, they get together at Checkers Pub on one of the Mondays on Wabash. They got a meetup group. But I don't see them here tonight, so I guess I'm going to have to take their place and carry the load here, which is not any problem. I went in search of the historical Jesus for many years needlessly, and until I determined that there were much more valid subjects, but if you want to pursue this, I think you're doing pretty good. All right, I'm going to be eclectic as usual. And just one of the things, you seem to make a declarations on the resurrection of Jesus, and they had the Jesus Project here, where they had all the Christian, the theologians. It was the guy out of DePaul that was running it. And the one thing the theologians, they couldn't agree on the scriptures, was the resurrection was the one where they could categorize in 4 different ways absolutely took place, and they agree. But in terms of the resurrection, I vaguely recollect the theologians could not concur solidly on any of the information or the alleged events that took place. Now you seem to have a certain measure of confidence in this, but the theologians apparently did not. Second point is, you mentioned here, and I'll use some of your statements against you. You mentioned there, you find God through arguments. I think if you're going to find God, at least the God that I'm looking for, you're going to do it through something called tests and measurements. There's 6 basic arguments for the existence of God. And those have been around. You're hitting on some of the new ones here. The one thing that really came to mind here in watching your PowerPoint presentation, now, I think it was about 2 years or so ago, I debated a Christian on creationism versus evolution. And what's singularly amazing is the very same illustrations that you used, I used in my presentation on atheism. As a matter of fact, I know there's better ones on the Big Bang. I don't like that one that looks like a water glass. There's better ones than that. I had the Easter egg and a whole bunch more. So it was amazing that the very same things, data, in essence, you're using, I was using to establish secular humanism here. The last of all, the point I want to make is, I think this, you're kind of got locked into the situation. You come along and you see a garden, and now, is there a gardener? And I don't think we can start making assertions, which I think you're kind of on the border. We cannot describe the gardener. We cannot make assertions. Absolutely, you have no authority whatsoever to make any assertions about that gardener, if there is one or not. And that's where you're at the point. Now, the last thing about the Big Bang is, you can say absolutely nothing whatsoever. You spend a lot of time on this, but you cannot say anything conclusively or with any validity about what took place before the precipitation of the Big Bang.
Oh, shoot.
Whoops.
Janet, I need somebody to help. Come on.
Yeah.
I need some help, guys. Are you okay? Yeah. What happened?
I always fall.
You okay?
Yeah.
Okay, just stand for a second.
No, I'm fine.
Just stand. Just 1 second.
I just can't.
Do you want some fresh air?
No, I just.
It looks like she stumbled and lost her footing is what happened.
Anyhow, I guess all right, thank you again, though. You gave us a lot to kick around here, yeah. Don't let this guy off the hook, man. I spent time hanging around with those unis. I haven't went out with a uni girl for years.
Okay.
Charlie.
That was a real test.
Salmon.
Is anything like a Harvey girl?
No, the Harvey girls.
All right. Our next speaker.
Oh, this guy.
You know him, huh, Joe?
Yes, string Doug. Doug the string.
I was sort of surprised. I thought we would have more of a position by the speaker tonight of being anti-Christian, for I titled skeptical Christian, but I have to say I support a lot of his views. The thing I wanted to point out is I brought my apologetics book along, and I just wanted to share a couple of things with you quickly from there that I found that may have some relevance. Early in the topic, the speaker brought up, or Kyle brought up about 3 questions. Who am I? What purpose do I have? Where am I going? And it turns out that in this book that I had, in a section called Life After Death, there was an argument for the meaning of life. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's a syllogism that they have. The major premise reads like this: if life ends in final annihilation, then life does not have an end worth living for. And the minor premise is life must have an end worth living for. So in the conclusion, which includes the part of the major premise and the minor premise, it says, therefore, life does not end in final annihilation. And it says here, explanation of major premise: if the whole temple of a man's achievements is destined to be buried beneath the debris of the universe in ruins, and no thought, no heroism can sustain an individual's life beyond the grave, then we this was Bertrand Russell's position in a work of his, of free man's worship, then we must build our lives on what Russell calls the firm foundation of unyielding despair. But this is psychologically impossible and logically contradictory. Despair is not a firm foundation, but precisely the lack of one. So, and then there's also in this same chapter something on Pascal's wager. I think a talk I gave here long ago that we should believe in God, even if we're not true believers, because the argument does not prove that there's life after death exists, only that it is foolish not to believe in it. Similarly, Pascal's wager for the existence of God does not prove that God exists, only that it's foolish not to believe in him, or at least not to want to believe in him. So, you know, it's just saying, because I know a lot of you here are tend to be non-believers or atheists or humanists, but one of the things I wanted to say is that yesterday I went to church and it was Good Friday, and I don't know if all of you are familiar with the Catholic worship on Good Friday, but we have a section in the ceremony where we have solemn petitions, and there are three things, and some of this you may relate to. First, we pray for the Pope and government officials. Then we pray for the Jewish people. We also pray for the people who do not believe in God. And then we pray for the people who do not believe in Christ. There's like a group of 10 of those that we pray for. And I just want to also add that tonight, this is Holy Saturday night, and this is a night that a lot of people who have been signed up in the rite of Christian initiation of adults get baptized, confirmed, and receive communion. And so tonight, this is going on in a lot of churches throughout the U.S. and the world, for that matter, and people are making commitments to Christ. And also, I just want to say that we use today on Sunday, Easter Sunday, we use a special kind of creed. Usually, I guess some of you may know the creed starts out, we believe in God, the Father Almighty, Creator of heaven and earth. Well, there is a special creed that we say at this time. It's kind of like a baptismal interrogatory creed. And it starts out, do you believe in God? And do you believe in Jesus Christ? Do you believe in the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary? Do you believe that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, died, and rose from the dead? And you reject Satan and all his works?
You want me to answer?
And you believe in the judgment coming of the living and the dead?
And I believe you've over time now.
Okay, thank you. I just want to get that in. Thank you very much.
I didn't find any answers, but there's more.
I'm calling on me. I'm from Bassford, and on my way here tonight, a beggar came into my L car and hit us up for money for medicine. One lady gave him $4. She was sitting across from me. I didn't have $4 to give him. I did have a quarter, and perhaps I was being illegal because it's forbidden to solicit on the L. And since it's a very frequent case that people beg on the trains, perhaps we were being foolish, but that's an existential question of belief. And if you believe in the God of mercy, whatever your religion may be, you may have all sorts of philosophical, philosophical concepts and so on, but when it comes to human need, the question is, what do you do? How do you react? Usually we figure, well, what the heck can I do? But there are a whole lot of ways of evading the answer that is requested. But Jesus went out of his way to not only meet people's needs, but to get other people to meet each other's needs. And that's the guy who shows me what it is to believe and what it is to be human. All right, Bob Lichtenberg.
The God question, how do you answer this question? Do you go by feelings, as was suggested in the talk tonight? No, you can't go by feelings. Feelings are what you, pretty much what you want to believe is true, what's optimistic, flattering, like there is a God and we'll all live in heaven, happy ever after. That's not a good basis for answering this biggest of all questions. The second one is good and evil. I won't be able to address that one tonight either, but there's a lot to be said. There is a God who probably gave humans a lot of free will, but I can't go into that. So how do you answer the God question? Metaphors was also suggested and kind of, went back and forth a little bit, but I think those are a fine way. Metaphor-like design is a fine way to talk about God and the higher things of life, because if you don't use a metaphor, you're limited to facts. And those don't explain much. Those are kind of piddly. We absolutely need them, but do they give us enough? Metaphors tend to say what we can't really say in the non-factual areas, like good poetry does. And answering the God question does require quite a bit of poetry, if you ask me, but I think the best way to answer this question briefly is just to have solid reasons. Whatever your belief is, you got to have solid reasons. The Big Bang does, where's Charlie? The Big Bang does have strong support behind it that it really did happen. And thing I think Charlie misses about it is it does prove that there was a time when there was no time and there was no space and there was no matter. So that's really a strong argument, if you ask me. You can even pinpoint the date. They pinpoint the date. You might think that's funny, but it's a scientific fact, and they could do it. It's just amazing how they can, but they can. That's not the only argument for God that has solid reasons behind it. The design argument certainly does. Has found a lot of new support today in the fine tuning, which is really spectacular for all that to be a coincidence, and in all other areas. Hitchens, it's not really up to date. He's not really up to date. A lot of the arguments for God are being revived today against narrow views of science. Just like intangibles are too, by the way. my philosophy, my personal philosophy. Come Friday to see if you see what I'm talking about there. But last thing I'd like to say is that someone asked the speaker, how did you get interested in the God question? A lot of people aren't really. They say, oh, it's too hard, there's no answer, you'll never know. True. But But there can't be any bigger or better question for us to answer. A whole lot is at stake, a whole lot depends on it. You know, whether or not there is a God. I think it does make a tremendous difference, and I think it's well worth our study. Thank you.
Okay, all right, you guys fighting.
With knives.
Dave Zucker, then Dave Travis. Because Dave arrived first.
Whoops.
Dave, why don't you just go in front and use the mic? Okay.
We usually give this guy.
All right.
Oh, okay.
Dave, there's not room enough for both of us.
Did you want to check
With regard to the comments that Gene made about the Seventh-day Adventists, it's not only the Seventh-day Adventists who look over the hymn to see whether or not they agree with it. Jews have been doing that for the hymns and for the liturgy for many years. That's part of our own little tradition, our own little habit of arguing back with God. That's number one. Number two, I enjoyed your presentation, and I found it very informative. However, I'm not entirely sure that the scientific approach is the best method to inquiring into God. That's something you take on faith. Either you believe it or you don't. That's simple. I do take issue with the rocket scientist in the room, at least slightly, however, in that I've lived quite comfortably with the idea of God and Charles Darwin for many years. And I have no problem with either one. Period. End of story on that score. That there's room for both God and science in the world. And in fact, that's one of my quarrels with fundamentalists generally. However, the following should be noted. First of all, fundamentalism doesn't exist only among religious people. And not all religious people are fundamentalists. It could be argued that the new atheists, including Sam Harris, are also fundamentalists of a sort. And it could also be argued that fundamentalism exists on a non-religious basis among people of political beliefs on both the liberal and conservative side of the fence, and most certainly among more traditional hardline communists who, if you didn't take Moscow's word for it, you were nobody. And in fact, to me, fundamentalism essentially is this, that regardless of whether or not it has a religious basis, basically a fundamentalist who believes in a very inflexible system of beliefs, and if you don't go along with their line, they think you're a jerk. Period, end of story. And you don't need to go among religious people to find that. You can find that, as I trust I've illustrated, just about any place. That's it. Thank you. Before you stand up, let me see if I can get out of here first.
I'm learning a lot from these guys.
Sure.
Learning nothing.
Mr. Travis, I think you were ready next, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing.
I was just waiting for some clearance.
You have it now.
Good evening. I'm David Travis. I don't believe in black holes. I don't believe in antimatter. In my mind, those things contradict my common sense. I don't believe there was ever a time when there was no such thing as space. I think space always was. Those are my personal opinions and beliefs. As far as the existence of a God or the non-existence of a God, those are things that every individual really has to resolve in his own mind and heart. But as for myself, I just finished celebrating Passover, and this is a holiday where we celebrate the fact that the Sea of Reeds was opened, and my people Israel walked across, and the Egyptians and their chariots were, the sea was closed up and they drowned. And so the greatest argument, in my opinion, for the existence of God is that we're here. We were trapped between the Egyptians and the Sea of Reeds, and we are here, so we survived.
Thank you, honey.
And therefore, somebody had to open up that sea, and it wasn't an atomic bomb or some kind of highly technological instruments. So that is my particular opinion. I want to put in here that it's interesting how that the people who are the hardcore left tend to be atheists, and yet socialism and communism are a religion in themselves, and that when they made a big fuss about creationism being taught in school, and they forced them to stop teaching it, the religious right had fits about it. There was nothing they could do until finally, a long time later, they managed to come up with a counter-argument and said, wait a minute, to teach that it's evolution and that we have in school that people came from apes and so forth, is you weren't there to see that, and therefore you're accepting that on faith just as much as people who believe in creationism are accepting on faith. And on this basis, they've gotten it back now to where in the schools they teach both creationism and evolution, and they say that you have to make up your own mind, which I think is a pretty fair idea. However, I notice on television, when they show documentaries and they talk about science and so on, they always take evolution as a given, that it's right. And I think that that already shows how wrong these people are. Because even if evolution is correct, they're accepting something that there is no proof of. Okay, so they might as well be screaming, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Thank you, I'm all finished.
It's not worth it. Go near this man.
All right, Brom, I got a brief one.
Better part of that war. That's just real brief. Babble.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for our speaker tonight. And you have a rebuttal, sir?
I'm gonna have a little personal opinion.
Come on up and come on up.
Excuse me.
Come on up. I'll defer my speaking time to this gentleman here.
I think we have time for everybody here. Time is on our side. I'm 76 and I still feel we have time on our side. So there's no reason to rush. But folks, I didn't get the benefit of the collective wisdom here tonight because I was getting ready to go to church. I go to church every Sunday and I go to the Greek coffee house every day, 7 days a week. Greek caffeinio, and every Sunday to church. I was an altar boy this time of year. Went back in the old neighborhood, Halsted and Blue Island and Harrison. I used to go every night and every day during Easter. I was a 5 years altar boy. See, I started out as a believer.
1 minute.
Then, from there, I became an agnostic. From there, I became an atheist. And that's after reading the Bible at the age of 65. I'm a slow reader. It took me 5 years. So afterwards, when I read, I realized that the Old Testament is a tree, and there's two sugar-coated
toxic fruits. One of them is my religion, a Christian Orthodox religion. The other is the sugar-coated toxic fruit from the Old Testament tree is Muhammad, Jesus Christ and Muhammad. These two fruits come from the productive tree of the Old Testament. Now, I became, at the age of 70 now, I became anti-theist. Why? Because I read Jesus Christ and the whole Bible story, which is a religion, a geopolitical agenda disguised as a religion. I say the people they hate the most are the Greeks, various places. Jesus Christ calls me a pig. He also says he didn't come to give his wisdom of salvation to the swine, and also a dog. And so I say, how the hell am I going to accept a God like that? I rejected SOB. He's not my God. If he is a God, he's my enemy. So when does he exist? I'll tell you when he exists. He does not exist. The only time, see, I don't need God to exist. You don't need God to exist. You know what? God needs you to exist. He only exists when you think about him.
Yeah.
It's not up to him to
Hate to
decide
agree.
for himself.
And personally,
not the rest of us.
I will have to go with the exact opposite of
Thank you.
what you had said.
Thank you.
The Christian message is so clear and crystal clear to most believers around the world, where God said, you know, we're all sinners. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die for our sins. And it is up to us to accept that gift of salvation or reject it. He also gave us the power to choose what we believe.
Thank you.
Personally, I believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I call myself a Christian. Tomorrow morning I will be celebrating the Easter message at Springbrook Community Church. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what you need to believe, because that's personal between you and God. So I'd like to thank everybody again here for a very good night at the college, and especially our speaker, Ram.
You have the last word.
Tim, is all truth personal?
Not all truth is personal, but
Well, not all.
But religious truth is.
I still think, Charlie, I think Christianity is fact.
I worship Karl Marx, according to that guy.
Well,
I pray to Karl Marx.
Marx was dead and in the grave. Jesus
Okay.
Christ rose from the dead.
All right, guys, let the speaker have the last word.
Karl Marx is very much alive.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so I did come here tonight to argue in favor of the existence of God, and but I want to open here with a few more things about what Jesus taught. It is true that I'm a Christian theist, and I do believe that Jesus Christ is the ultimate revelation. And I just wanted to read a few verses. First of all, I would say that the Christian message is clear that Jesus is the Savior of the whole world, of every race, religion, creed. Jesus loves all of us. That's clearly taught in Scripture. John 2:1-2 says, "My dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. But if anybody does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. He is the atoning sacrifice for our sins, and not only for ours, but also the sins of the whole world." So I do believe that the Christian message is very clear that God loves all of us. I do think that a God who didn't love all of us would not be worthy of worship and should be rejected. But thankfully, I don't believe that's the God of Christian theism. I also want to point out that another person mentioned the possibility of giving freely to someone begging for money, and whether that was a good thing to do and so forth. I wanted to point out Jesus' teaching on mercy. I talked a little bit about how I think we can have good reason to believe in Christ because of the resurrection, but I think that it's also important to see what Jesus really taught, and so I think that some of his teachings do have a ring of truth they're pretty excellent. So Jesus said, this is something that I actually discussed in my Bible study just a couple weeks ago, so I wanted to mention this briefly. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. So Jesus' teaching of ultimate mercy, I think, would support a compassion and a love for everybody, including those who maybe need some financial help or help in other ways. So I do think that Jesus is a compelling message for us. And this is another reason that I do think that Christian theism is a belief worth investigating because of the teachings of Christ. All right, so a few other comments based on the responses here. First of all, I want to mention that some people were mentioning, that I'm coming up here and trying to prove God or to almost put myself in the place of God, that I could be a mere mortal, come up here and explain what God is all about and so forth. I just want to point out that I wasn't intending to imply that I have the absolute truth and that there's no possibility for me to be wrong. I was just presenting what I think are some solid reasons to believe that God exists. If you disagree, then you're welcome to that disagreement. I would let the arguments stand where they may. But my intention is not to pretend that I am all-knowing or incapable of making flaws in logic and reasoning and so forth. There were a few comments that were kind of a little bit disparaging towards philosophy, and this idea that maybe philosophy really isn't a good way to get at truth. But the problem with that view, the view that maybe we can only find truth through science, is that let's say that you take the view that science is the only thing that reveals truth. That itself is a philosophical viewpoint, a viewpoint called scientism, that science is the only way to truth. And so it's impossible to avoid thinking carefully about important philosophical issues.
Logical positivism.
And what's that?
Logical positivism.
Well, so I think that no matter what, you're going to have some sort of philosophy, and pretending that we don't have to think about things from a philosophical standpoint is not true. So, am I avoiding the findings of science? Well, that depends on what you think science is all about. If science is all about showing how the universe can exist without a God, well, that's kind of another philosophical viewpoint, a viewpoint that God doesn't exist and science is all there is. That can give us truth once again. So I'm not afraid of science. I was hoping to be using sound and current relevant science in the arguments that I made today. The arguments were not scientific arguments for God, but they were philosophical arguments. You notice that they had premises and so forth. And they used science to increase the probability of the premises being true, to argue that the premises were true. So it's still philosophical reasoning for God, but it just is using current scientific research to support the premises. It's come up a lot that maybe this whole approach to thinking about God is not the right approach to take. Some people believe in God, some people don't. It's a personal issue, it's a matter of faith. Everyone has to come to this decision for themselves. It is true that everybody has to come to the decision for themselves, but anything that I've said here tonight does not rob you of that opportunity. I was just offering my perspective on what I think are good arguments for God's existence. It is true that we all have to come to our own viewpoints on these issues. If you think that you can't use science or philosophy to prove the existence of God and it's something that you want to accept on faith, then you're welcome to do that. But some others might have a viewpoint that God's existence has an impact in the world and what we would expect to find, and so there's good reason to look to the world to see if we can discover that God exists, or possibly discover, if at all possible, what He's like. So I don't necessarily think that faith and science are opposed. As many have mentioned, they're not opposed. In fact, I think that science can support faith in these arguments. But even if you didn't think that was the case, these arguments are all invalid. Certainly, someone could have a personal faith in God. Maybe that's based on personal revelation. Maybe that's based on other reasons that don't have to do with science or philosophy. That'd be fine. I do think it's important not to believe in God just because we want to. I don't want to believe things just because they make me feel good. That doesn't strike me as a likely way to arrive at truth. So I wouldn't want to take that approach. But just because something is good or something is a conclusion that you would like to accept, that's not an argument that it's not true. So maybe it's true that God could be a crush for you. It can be a constantly praying to God can bring you peace and love and so forth. Maybe it has good consequences in your life. Well, if God does exist, isn't that what you'd expect? That by believing and praying to God and so forth, it has good consequences in your life? But certainly it wouldn't show that therefore God is simply a figment of your imagination. It's just the way that maybe if you love your spouse, the fact that you love them and you want them to exist doesn't prove they don't. We just have to evaluate the arguments as they stand to see whether or not they get us to a good conclusion. So, does the Big Bang prove atheism or theism? Was one topic that was mentioned briefly. I do think that
Big Bang has nothing to do with it.
The Big Bang is simply one piece of evidence that the universe began to exist. And if you think that, therefore, that is the foundation for a good argument for God's existence, then the Big Bang might give you some evidence, but the Big Bang doesn't necessarily prove one way or the other whether or not God exists, I would say. And I don't really have any other comments to make. I know we've got to get wrapped up, but once again, I do appreciate very much you guys.
Yeah.
I'll have you back. I hope this was an engaging conversation and hopefully give you some things to think about in this Easter weekend. Thanks so much.
Gavel us out, Brom.
All right.
That was a big bang.
Thank you all for
Thank you very much.
Go out and sin no more.
No, number one time.
coming.